staff to respond. I'm going to call Mr. Fontes, and I'm going to ask him to please try to limit your statement to about 3 minutes. We were fortunate enough, thank you very much for sending your statement in advance. That helps a lot. We were able to forward these to Trimet's staff, and they've been able to look into it, so they're better prepared to answer your questions. So, Mr. Fontes.
Thank you. As you know, my primary concern is the constitutionality of the Trimet fare system. Okay. Article 1, Section 20 could not possibly be any clearer. I'll read it again. No law shall be passed granting to any citizen or a class of citizen privileges or immunities upon which the same terms, shall not equally belong to all citizens. Now, the entire Trimet fare schedule has been pretty much in the same ratios for decade after decade. This is not a new thing. And what it does, it goes beyond the federal and state law, and for people who are as old as I am, or who have handicaps, or who receive Medicare, to receive fares which are as low as 26% of what the regular fares are. The law only requires 50%, and that costs Trimet real money. I figure about $5.5 million per year at least. It is common practice in the transit industry to have such fares. This is not unusual, but that doesn't make it right. If you look at the history of segregation in this country, we passed the Equal Rights, Equal Protection Amendment, the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Back in 1868, it took almost 90 years before the Supreme Court finally said you cannot have separate but equal education. It took another 24 years before the court said you cannot have reverse segregation in the Bakke case. And that's what's happening here. We're having a special privilege granted to certain people that we feel should be allowed that privilege, even if there's no need required. The richest person in Oregon, Phil Knight, he's over 65. He could ride Trimet for these reduced prices. There are rich handicapped people too. I don't know who the richest one in Oregon is, but there are wealthy handicapped people. The question here, because this committee has such limited, or the commission has such limited jurisdiction, I'm only asking you to consider the excess beyond what the state and federal law require. If you look at the charts on the presented in today's handout, the critical things to note is that Trimet's base fare, what the average person pays, $2.50, is the highest by far than it's ever been. The primary reason for this so high is because they dropped the zone system. It's also one of the highest in the country. It's the only one I know of that's higher is New York's cash fare, which is $2.75. Honolulu is $2.50, Sacramento $2.50, and probably a few others, but most are less than that. But most critically of all, our cash fare is getting farther and farther away from the average fare. That means that the cash fare, the few people that are paying cash fare at the top rate, are spending more and more money just to pick up the load for those that are getting discounts or even free fares. On West, your review had some numbers in there, but they really didn't cover the whole situation. The critical thing is the West ridership growth is rapidly declining, that it's forecasted to grow only by 3.5% per year, that it's at about half of what original projections were, that it requires extraordinary subsidies, about 10 times the Trimet's average, that require extraordinary subsidies even if it met projections. And finally, that these extraordinary expenses result in a net transit loss in the district. And I think that is a legal question. Can Trimet operate a service with no hope, spend $6 million a year in subsidies, year after year after year, when it reduces the full transit service? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trimet staff or the board would like to respond?
Well, I can respond a bit, maybe follow up on this. The board has had this question before, and we actually directed staff to come back with some work on our fare system overall. I think we call it a fare system analysis. And many of the issues he's brought up were issues that we want to look at, especially the senior student and others. But we are keenly aware of the price of our tickets on a daily and per ride basis. We just were provided some information in our packets from the outline. There are a number of jurisdictions at the same level we are and a number that are above. But we're probably one of the only businesses where the more success we have in terms of ridership means, again, we have an additional need for subsidy. You see that it's not just the West system that requires a subsidy, but all of the system requires a subsidy. And so we understand that, and we'd like to have a fare system. We're asking ourselves what's the right balance of fares and other operating revenues, and so we hope to have that dialogue again in the next few months as we move forward into looking at our overall fares.
If I might, just to add one other fact, you know, you can always pick a lot of numbers out of our monthly performance report or our annual performance report. One thing that I think is important to note is that when it comes to system cost and the contribution of fares to that, we're at the last month was about 30% of system cost was actually covered by fare revenue. And that's a pretty high number, if you will, I think in a good sense for the agency. Now, that does reflect higher fares, but it also reflects efficiency. More than anything else, it really reflects efficiency of the service provided and the productivity of the service that's on the street. So this is something that the board has asked us to particularly focus on. They want to begin to investigate fare policy much more, and that does include that comparison between the various groups and whether or not the subsidies that are applied are really as intentional and as targeted as they need to be. If there are questions about the legality, our general counsel here, Janet Tran, can certainly answer those questions related to that.
Well, we have two questions from Commissioners.
I just have a couple of follow-ups. When will your fair study be done? What's your goal for having that completed?
We're actually briefing the board on that, I think, in May. Again, the sense is that this will be largely information, and then the board will be providing policy direction to us to sort of size something up. So
and will you share that with our staff?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then, could you comment on I was a little startled from the testimony, but seems to be a difference between WES and the rest of the system in terms of subsidy. Could you talk about that and how that fits into the picture?
Well, there's no question that WES is a more expensive service in terms of the subsidy. I would tell you that WES is also very integrated into the system, so everybody who uses WES is generally also using MAX at one end or bus access. So it's a very integral part of our service. We do get subsidy also from the Wilsonville Smart System, so it's not just Trimet's responsibility to keep that service running. And the other thing to understand about WES is that it's really a fixed cost. Running the trains and maintaining the tracks is really pretty much a fixed cost. So what our job is to do is to bring more people on board so that the average cost goes down per customer. WES has had a growth every month since it's opened in ridership, and the last month was on the order of 6 or 7%. So we are seeing healthy growth there. Part of our problem with WES, I believe, was that it opened in the depths of the Great Recession, and so it was a service focused on commuting to jobs, and many of the jobs, particularly the Wilsonville end, had evaporated. Hollywood Video exists no more, and it was right at the end. So we're beginning to see that change and turn around, and we're seeing the results in ridership. And so there is hope, I think.
Well, it's more of a comment, I guess, than a question. I'm not here to either defend or criticize the budget. That's not my point at all. You know, running Trimet is sort of like trying to run the country. We want to reduce the deficit, but no one wants to pay for it. And so, to that particular extent, I think, and I know you recognize that, but I also think that it's easy for those of us to find various points of contention with the system, but nevertheless, there are tremendous challenges in terms of expense reduction and revenue growth. And I suppose you somewhere have discovered that your public isn't particularly shy when you talk about revenue growth or the need to increase ticket prices. So it's not something that I see as simple as simply making a decision, because that decision continues to be influenced by public comment, public protest over a 20-cent increase or whatever it might be. So I just wanted to recognize that it's not easy.
Without getting into that, we don't have enough time or your expertise on my side, but without getting into the technical legal aspect, I don't know if General Counsel would like to make some brief remarks about the public testimony.
Well, I think probably the key point is the concern about the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the Constitution. And I'm sure you are aware that the state constitution is construed similarly to the federal constitution. The point here is that when we talk about classes or characterizing ridership, it is not impermissible so long as it isn't based on an immutable characteristic. So to the extent we're talking about riders who are who have disabilities or who are of a certain age, so long as we're treating them all the same, it doesn't run afoul of the law.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Funtis, for your testimony, and we definitely look forward to the Fair Fare study. I think it goes along with the initiatives we're looking at, the ridership, these ticketing booths and the gates, ways to close the gap and look at subsidies in a more fair way.